tips for that is just finding your voice, finding your own meanings, asking yourself the hard questions. What is your work about? What is your work exploring? And really just, finding who you are within yourself in relation to others, I think is very important in the creative process. So that's my first tip for students who are watching this. My second tip would be think identity, but keep community in mind. So with everything that's been going on with the pandemic, with COVID and social justice movements, I've learned a lot about what it means to make work outside the studio, what it means to make work with a community focus in mind. And that's, recently something that I've been learning, and recently something that's been happening a lot for me is I've been doing more community work as an artist. For students, usually you go into becoming an artist because you want to find yourself, you want to tell your story, you want to create whatever you want to create, but you don't realize how much your work affects the general public. And I think keeping that in mind is very important. And then that's something that I've been doing due to COVID and with everything that's been going on social justice wise. So finding who is your community is very important. I'm very invested in community work as an artist. How can I make my art connect more with the community, not just from my ideas, but keeping in mind other people's perspectives and their stories too. I think that we are more connected than we think, especially with everything that we've been learning about, everything that's been happening in this whole year. I think we have really realized that we're more connected than we think. And my last tip would be around people who think differently than you. I think one of the joys of growing is when you put yourself in places that you're around people who think differently than you. The next slide. But the next slide after that was pretty much just showing more community work that I've done in regards to my job. That slide right there. So I work with people with dementia. I've been working in the mental health field for 5 years. And I've been working in group home settings and with children at risk, fetal alcohol syndrome. And now I work with dementia residents. And so what I've been doing with everything that's been going on and not wanting to really be in the studio, I've been making sketches of my residents that I only get 15 minutes with because I have to be 6 feet away from them. And I've been making sketches of them because I'm interacting with them on a more close-knit level than I was before when I just provided activities. Now I'm having to meet with them every day and give them individual time because they're not meeting with their families. So I started creating these sketches of my residents, my favorite residents, and some of my least favorite residents that don't come to my activities, but I started making sketches of them because I think it's important. So I started to take a step back from everything that was going on in my community and being a Black woman and being an African woman and all the things that I was experiencing race-wise, and started to think about the elderly community that are really affected by COVID. And they are the most vulnerable. And I started to think outside of myself and really start to think about them. And that's where these sketches I've kind of started. And then on the right side, I just have the mural I did of George Floyd during the whole protest that really, pushed me to think about making murals, which was way out of my comfort zone. You can go to the next slide. And then, like I said, with the tip about, thinking about identity and community, I work a lot with immigrant youth. in my community that live in Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park, Coon Rapids, Fridley area. And what I did was I raised funds to bring them to Uptown to paint on these plywood murals in front of CVS. And that was one of my projects that I did after the George Floyd mural. And it was a really successful project. The youth loved it, and they were able to engage and be a part of the conversation, which I think is very important because they're going to be like the future generation. So, yeah. You can go to the next slide. You can go to the next slide. Oh. The next slide after that talks about investigating and investigate and then forget. Investigate and forget what you find. I think is very important, especially what I learned from my professors was about research as an artist. I think a lot of people forget that. I think a lot of creatives, I think we forget that we are also scientists, or we are also investigators. You know, we are really investigating something or some things that people overlook. And I think that that's an important part in creating. So I really take a lot of time to investigate the concepts that I'm exploring. And before post-COVID and everything that's been going on, I was really invested in my culture, learning more about Liberia, where my parents are from, learning more about the American Colonization Society, and having those conversations, a different conversation about oppression. So investigating is very important. So that's my top third. That's my top third tip. So research, research, research. Once you find what you're looking for, I think it's important to forget what you've learned, because if you stay, continuously investigating these things, you'll forget about the making process, which is another component. So that's my third tip. Next slide. My fourth tip for students is develop your own language, which is easier said than done. I'm still developing my own language, but I think the more you create, the more you discover your language. So keep creating things that are true to you in your story, and you develop your own languages. And I love things that have contradiction. I love exploring contradictions and those complexity situations and things like that. So don't be afraid to explore contradictions. Sometimes the process is more important than the work. I really think that's true. The work might not come out the way you want it to, but the process of how you got there is, I think, what's it all about. That's what the viewer is going to connect to. And the process helps you find your own language. So that's my last tip. Next slide. Oh, I think there's a tip before that. Embrace being uncomfortable. I think that, once we figure out what we're making work about, and once we figure out what we're trying to say with our work, we get so comfortable with it that we don't want to change, and then when we do find ourselves in a stuck position as creatives, we don't know what to do, or we don't want to be uncomfortable again. We forgot the adrenaline rush that we got when we were uncomfortable actually created the work. So I suggest embracing being uncomfortable. You don't have to always stay uncomfortable, but I think when you find yourself at a crossroads in your work, I think you should embrace that crossroads, because the next work you're going to develop after that is going to be very strong. So embrace being uncomfortable. That's my last tip. So getting lost is okay. Not knowing is okay, and exploring is okay. And this is just a quote that I kind of live by, is being uncomfortable takes you places comfort can only imagine. And I think that's really true. So, yeah. So that's all the tips I have. In those slides, we're able to see a little bit about my work and just how I transformed after undergrad, and my 5 tips. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lissa. And despite our technical difficulties, you're still so eloquent, and I feel like I learned a lot, and I like the embrace being uncomfortable. I think that's really important right now, especially for us all. Okay, next up, we're gonna have Helen. Helen, do you want to prepare your slides?
Hi, yeah, I'm gonna share my screen now.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed. All right, you seeing the screens?
Yeah, looks good to me.
Excellent. Hi, so I'm Helen Shewolfe Tseng. I'm an artist, witch, and freelance designer and illustrator. And I was born to Taiwanese immigrants in the rural Deep South, which often informs my work. I'm currently located in San Francisco, California on occupied Ohlone land. And I want to thank the Weissman for having me, and thanks, Lissa, for your beautiful tips. I wish I had known that when I was a younger artist. Today, I'm going to talk about a current obsession of mine that has woven itself throughout my work, my life, and my psyche. A few years ago, I became very preoccupied with coyotes, which are often spotted in the Bay Area near where I live and work. Coyotes are genetically adjacent to the domestic dog, man's best friend, but they're removed enough from civilization to be considered vermin. In indigenous mythologies, coyote is a trickster, and tricksters are questioners, forgers of new paths and visions, and foes of oppressors. Tricksters often use secret knowledge as access points to the divine and sacred, or to expose power imbalances. The more I learn about and experience coyotes, the more I find that they're connected by subtle threads to so many other things that have been important to me throughout my life. And so I've been using the coyote as a symbol, a mirror, and a proxy to understanding the world and my place within it. This is an animated diptych I made for a theoretical video game about coyote adaptation. I've been fascinated with various studies I've read on the resilience of the coyote, a kind of fission-fusion adaptation that is also present in humans, particularly those who have a history of migration and or trauma as a result of persecution or colonization. Since the arrival of European settlers in the United States, coyotes have been one of the most exterminated mammals in North America, but they have defied extinction and have survived and thrived beyond expectation. Like people, coyotes have the rare ability to function in both large packs and in solitary pairs. Extermination efforts cause coyotes to scatter and migrate widely across the landscape, and they're able to adapt and populate in new and unfamiliar areas. As a result, they are now present in all major cities in the United States, where they can live up to twice as long. I created these prints last summer while in residence at The Future, a space for witches and artists in Minneapolis. I'd been turning to the corners of my own ancestry and personal histories for rituals and motifs to explore in my work and spiritual practice, and in engaging in some new myth building and revision. This print is a protective spell for immigrants, inspired by the paper food talismans my mom brings back for me from temples in Taiwan, which you can see on the right side of the screen, the smaller folded hexagons. Everything on the print is symbolic. coyotes for migration and adaptation, 5 bats, a Chinese symbol for blessings and also a migratory animal, and sacred geometries with auspicious numerologies, nodding to Taoist protective sigils. These prints can be folded into hexagons like the talismans, and the act of folding them is a ritual performance. Last year, I also spent a stretch of time in residence in the Marin Headlands, just north of San Francisco, on a quest to study the local coyotes. Coyotes camouflage perfectly against long grass, and they're often already aware of my existence long before I am of theirs. I'm deeply humbled by how long it took for me to learn to notice them in the landscape. I spent days walking trails, tracking scat, talking to rangers and hikers. It became clear that I might not see them at all during my stay, and that if so, my work would have to be about that. That despite living in a society where we're increasingly accustomed to making things appear at will through various technologies, and they're often exploited laborers, I was not, in fact, entitled to see a coyote just because I wanted to, just because I happened to be a human artist who had decided to make art about them within a limited time frame. On the left, I began painting coyotes from blurry images cataloged by people on nature identification apps, and eventually from my own blurry photos of various sightings. On the right, these are tiny pixel drawings of coyotes that I made, in thinking about the perceptive shift that seemed to happen in real time while I was walking paths and relearning how to look and listen and experience the land like an animal might. These instincts that had laid dormant in me during the years I spent working on and interacting with screens. This part of me that, like magic, began to breathe again. These are bits from a comic I've been working on around that project and experience. The coyote has been a kind of portal for me, an indirect path to examining my identity in relation to migration, intergenerational trauma, survival, and my relationship to ideas of home, while creating distance from external perceptions and containment. It has been a metaphor through which I deepen my relationship with living in this body in relationship to all the other people that have been connected to me by various threads. Coyotes have also given me a reference point to considering the implications of being part of the human species on a systems level in relation to all the other life on this planet during this particularly destructive timeline. A reminder that we are part of nature in relationship with the land and its inhabitants, not separate from it, nor exempt from its consequences. And that some of the ways we've constructed value has devastating consequences for those marginalized by those values, and that other paths exist. Earlier this year, I started a new series of drawings as we entered a global pandemic, which I've been thinking of also as a portal of sorts, both a closing and an opening. The act of drawing these coyotes became portals for me as self-portraits and as a visual diary of my life in quarantine. The words portal and portrait share an etymological root, meaning through, forward, to draw forth. This series is ongoing, and they're informed by a variety of things. What I've been reading, seeing, feeling, thinking about, and drawing connective threads between. They often open conversations about those things with other artists and people in my community. They've become a way to play, experiment, and engage in personal inquiry in a time that is both monotonous and overwhelmed with crisis and tragedy. And they've become a lifeline for me and my mental health in the past few months. In classic trickster fashion, the coyote has been a portal to thinking beyond the ways I had been conditioned to adapting to new circumstances, and to reevaluating my relationships to self, space, time, work, value, community, institution, and so much more. I leave you with an offering, a zine I made back in March called the Pedestrian Society of Space and Time. It provides prompts and rituals of curiosity and care for your local surroundings. And it's available as a free PDF at psst.zone. May it open a portal or two for you. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Helen. Do snaps, emojis, claps, whatever we can do in the virtual world, huh? Fantastic. That was wonderful. Exploring yourself through drawing. I love that. And someone in the chat said elegant drawings. I think elegant is such a beautiful way to put it. Next up, we have Dara. In the meantime, I invite you to start putting your questions in the Q&A. Dara's our last presenter here, so after everyone has presented, we're going to start answering some questions and getting some conversations going. Okay, perfect.
You guys can see the screen?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you both, Lissa and Helen. Your words were so encouraging and beautiful. I'm just going to begin with, let's see. Yes, we're going to just begin with how awkward I was. That's me in the middle on Easter Sunday, huge red corsage. And that is still who I see in the mirror today. A little Black girl growing up in DC, just feeling peculiar AF. I won't say the F word as much as I often say it. I was the epitome of awkward Black girl, always just trying to find where I fit. And if you're a creative, you may know something a little bit about that. I was obsessed with books. I was reading James Baldwin and Zora Neale Hurston and Richard Wright and Maya Angelou when my cousins and my girlfriends were consumed with Tevin Campbell and Saved by the Bell and New Kids on the Block. I'm telling on my age here a little bit. My friends really were Black women writers growing up. I was obsessed with every single book that J. California Cooper wrote. I was reading Waiting to Exhale at 12 and Marita Golden. I just was obsessed with story. And here's why. I was blessed being raised by a crew of strong, powerful Black women. I have 3 grandmothers, 8 aunts. My father's been married 3 times, so I have a gang of stepmothers, and even more godmothers. And that was a gift to me, because the thing about all of them was that they were also different, and that and I was just surrounded by stories. In fact, they could tell a mean story, but they were also the story. And around me, everywhere I saw, as this girl who loves story, I found stories everywhere, in open Bibles, in burning candles, soul food simmering in big Black pots and in cast irons, folded napkins that matched lacy curtains. Those were stories, because they were hand sewn by someone in my family. Big, beautiful, bold church hats, you guys. I mean, so much story in a church hat. And
growing up listening to Mahalia Jackson and just feeling the story in her voice. So many stories. And if you can just see in the faces of these aunties who are looking at you, that's my Aunt Jan, whose laugh was boisterous. In the middle, my Aunt Deborah, always making something or selling something. And my oldest aunt, Sarita, bossing somebody around somehow, somewhere. And if someone began with a child, or, well, let me tell you, or my favorite was, guess who I saw? you better grab a chair. To be a Black girl who loved stories was to just be in a perpetual state of bliss. And there was always a mic. In my growing up, I just always felt like there was this invisible mic being passed around. And each person I'd see grab it, it would be yet another door into my own understanding of how powerful my own voice would be someday. In one afternoon of hearing stories, I might find in them a warning, a remedy, a poem, a prescription, a prayer, or even, depending on the occasion, a prophecy. I don't have time to talk about it, but I have some women in my family who have the gift of sight and can cast spells. We'll talk about that next time. So I was this weird kid in the corner, writing what I saw and imagining the worlds that I was reading about. And I always would hear some version of this from my mom. Well, of course she likes books. I couldn't stop reading when I was carrying her. My mother would proudly declare when a friend of hers or a distant cousin would comment on how quiet I was. That would be her response. Really what they meant was that I was kind of strange. And I just turned 40 in September, and I can tell you that hasn't changed about me. And my advice to you, dear creatives, is that it's better for you to accept now that normal is just never who you were meant to be. So speaking of awkward, by the time I went to college, I gave up the ghost, as my elders would say. I knew I was different, and I started to own it. I began doing something I'd watched everyone around me do my whole life that I hadn't quite done myself, and that was started grabbing the mic. And by that, I mean I created my first platform to help other women of color do the same. In 1999, an upperclassman named Erica walked up to me on my campus in Virginia, and she said, "Girl, why are you always late to class?" Because I was always running late. I was reading, writing, doing things. I was like always on my own schedule. So I was talking to Erica about why I was so late. And the reason was because I was trying to figure out and play with this idea of starting a literary magazine for the powerful voices of color on my campus. And then always trying to figure out, like, how could I tell more stories? How could I write more stories? So I shared this idea with Erica, who is just this vibrant personality. And Erica said, "I got you." Those 3 words, "I got you." And by the end of the week, I had a staff. Our magazine had a name, and I became a publisher for the first time. I became editor-in-chief of our first literary magazine on campus for Black and Latinx women, and it was called Libations. A publisher was born, and I never looked back. And that's me and 3 of the Libations staff in 2013. Those are 3 of my best friends still today. And if you can't guess, Erica is the one on the right, the fierce queen with the white hat and the sunglasses. And there's me, always awkward, floppy hat. And the thing about starting Libations was that when I did it, I felt the power of story for the first time. I felt the power of my own story, but ultimately the power of our collective story. I felt in my voice that it was finally home, if that makes sense to you as a creator. And I could feel the collective exhale from the sisterhood. So my next point for you to think about is that when we step out with our word, we're not just stepping out for our word for ourselves. We're stepping out for our word in community with other people who are doing the same. So sometimes stepping out to grab the mic means you need a little push, which happened to me with Erica and Libations, and it happened again 15 years later, I had a similar conversation with my colleague, who is an ambitious, brilliant young woman, Amy, and she and I were working together. And like Erica, Amy held space for a dream. And that dream was called Wise Ink. And one day, 3 words that she said would change my life again. She said, Dara, I'm quitting. And then she said, and we are going to go start Wise Ink. And it's almost 8 years later, and Amy and I are still together, and I have a job that allows me to be in complete alignment with my purpose. So here's what I know from the earliest days of Libations to today, being the CEO of Wise Ink. And I hope you just write this down if you can. Remember it, put it on a Post-it note. And that is, every one of us is called. Here's what else I know. Every powerful book that has ever transformed you was a love letter from that writer to herself. In other words, you as a creator are on a divine path to uncover something so massively special that when you find it, you'll reignite that journey again and again and again and again. To be clear, that it is you. In the words of our beloved Toni Morrison, you are your best thing. The it is you. And like the vibrant women I've grown up with and got to go to school with and get to work with today at Wise Ink, I know this more than I know anything, and that is that you are the story. You were always the story. If you remember nothing else from this presentation, remember this, and that is that when you grab the mic, you are breathing life into a world that needs your breath. I'll say it again. When you grab the mic, when you create anything, you are breathing life into a world that needs your breath. So stop second guessing yourself. You are good enough and your voice matters. What you're noticing in this world right now, what you're holding, what you're afraid of, and what you need this world to be for you, create that. And know that that is someone's lifeline that you are creating. I'll say it one more time. You are called. And then I have one final thing to say. Mic grabbers are not born overnight, but once we are born, we need each other. We are in this together. I need your work. Let's promise to nurture and harness the stories we're holding individually and collectively. Reach into the weirdest kept hidden corners of your imagination and trust us with what's there. And then encourage someone you know to do the same. It's okay to be bold. It's totally normal to be awkward. And then I just wanted to spend a couple seconds on what my current publishing adventure is. So I'm writing this book series about real life Black queens, and I just launched a pre-order on Sunday. And I only mention that because I'm so fucking terrified and I'm feeling my most vulnerable. I'm nervous. And so I know that that means I'm exactly where I belong. To what Lissa said, I'm uncomfortable and I'm just leaning into that. So in this moment, I'm walking the walk. I'm following the power of my word yet again. I'm grabbing the mic in a new way and creating a project from my soul. And it's a risk and it's a lot of work. And I only say this because, again, I want you to know, because I'm saying this to me right now, you are breathing life into a world that needs whatever it is that you're creating. And for me, I'm reminding myself that this project about Black queens is for me, but it's also for we. So thank you, creatives. May you go forth in your bold awkwardness, being and creating and connecting with the power of your word. Thank you so much for having me today.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone, you know, wherever you are, give a snap or a clap to our wonderful creatives today. I'm feeling a lot of, you know, inspiration. I'm feeling recharged and fired up, and it's so great to hear from all of you. And you're all on very different paths and very different areas, but I feel like there were some common threads, you know, thinking about communities and where we fit in our communities, finding ourselves individually and reflecting on that and feeling empowered in that. And also being okay with being uncomfortable. I feel like that's all something we're struggling with right now. And I think it's really inspirational and wonderful to hear from all of you. So thank you so much. And now we can go to some questions. Our first question here is from an anonymous attendee. They said, do you feel any tension between a need for responsiveness to community, to external circumstances, and your own to create intention and aspirations, individual intention and aspirations?
I guess I'll start. I did feel a lot of tension to create, especially when everything was happening with the George Floyd thing. I felt a lot of tension to respond, but it wasn't necessarily, I don't think my community was asking it of me. I think myself was asking it of me. You know, myself was saying, we need to go do something, you know, and I tried protesting, did it for 6 days straight. And I just had so much anger in me that I didn't know where it came from and didn't know where to put it, because I would go to work, get off work, go protest, then go back to work. And then the environment in which I worked, the demographics too, I was like, I don't know, I was just questioning everything. Right. So I did feel that tension to do something. But I think sometimes, you know, we get this tension, but some of the tension that we experience comes from ourselves. It comes from us feeling like we have to do more, you know, not necessarily does it always come from the community. It comes from us feeling like, okay, we say that we want to do something. Here's our chance to do something. So go do something. So that's kind of the tension I was feeling.
I can agree with all of what you said, Lissa. I was grappling with that tension quite a lot. And I don't think I would have gotten through the month of June without therapy and without my own personal projects that had nothing to do with white supremacy, systemic racism, misogyny, all of the things, pandemic. I needed something completely separate just for me. And so, you know, I don't know if anyone needs to hear this, but I think that as a creative, you need sacred spaces that are just for you, that it doesn't matter if anyone reads it or sees it or pays for it. It's just, I almost see it as like an altar, which I have an altar in my home, but I also consider my journals and my notepads an extension of my altar, a place where I pray. My yoga mat is an altar. And I think that I need all of that as my own sort of other half of my heart that needs to keep beating so that I can be out and doing work. And so, yes, I am, you know, I just created a reparations program within Wise Inc. And I'm hoping it'll serve as a model for other publishers, because I think almost every institution that is a capitalistic structure that's a for-profit business needs to have a reparations entity that is centering Indigenous and Black and Brown voices in some way. And so creating that could not have happened without writing my own crappy novel that will never see the light of day. You know what I mean? I need to have something for me so that I can have something for we.
Yeah, I love that about the personal sacred space and altar, which I so agree with. I think that I also struggle with that tension of, you know, is it pressure or does it come from a genuine place of wanting to create something? And there's so many ways that we're pressured to make things for the sake of, you know, having made them. And I've been, you know, this time has been a good clarifying time. And I've also been thinking in smaller circles, I think, of like my the circles I'm able to extend care to and dedicate care to versus these sort of, you know, virtue signals or, you know, kind of gestures that are often empty and, but like kind of visible. So I've been turning to kind of community ways of sharing and mutual aid.
Absolutely, thank you. Dara, someone in the chat wants to know a little bit more about your reparations program. Do you have a link that you could put in a chat for them, or?
Yeah, if you go to wiseinc.com, just click Our Voices Matter, and you'll see a description of each of our programs that we just launched underneath that. Project Exodus is specifically set up as a reparations program, and what that will look like is funding 10 authors at a time to have their books fully funded, and they would own full ownership, and they also retain full profits. And so that's the model that I'm thinking, is that, you know, imagine an author not having to sign a book contract or have royalties split with a publisher. They get it fully funded and they sell it. They hand sell it. They sell it through website, Amazon, bookstores, whatever, and whatever they make, they keep. I think that this model can be adapted across every industry. And I think that organizations like Target and organizations like Amazon can figure out ways to have a reparations angle or element of what they're doing. It's owed, and I'm doing it obviously because I believe it's owed, but also because I want to normalize the conversation around reparations. And I also want to be able to see how it works, and also to be able to say that if my 6-person little organization was able to do this, figure out a way to do this, and trust me, I will. You saw my aunties, I will figure out a way to do this. Then billion-dollar and multi-million-dollar companies can figure out how to do it. Governments can figure out how to do it. So a thing I love most is being underestimated, and you guys will see this felt through our community. Authors out there earning their own money, and having this become a pathway to economic liberation.
Fantastic. Thank you for telling us more about that. We have a question for Lissa specifically. Do you find yourself more drawn to oil or acrylics when painting? And which medium do you feel portrays the emotions of your experiences, societal issues, and or trauma of your content the best? Kind of thinking about self-expression within a medium. Oh, you're muted, looks like.
Okay. Thank you for that question. That's a good one. Really, I just kind of I always have oil and acrylic in the studio with me. So I grab either or. Most of the time I just really pick it up. But one of the things I really use to really get some of that emotional, you know, emotionalness that I have in me out, I use a lot of charcoal in my drawings. And that's how I kind of really express myself. And then I just use color to support that, right? Because I don't like dark pieces. So even if I'm having heavy conversations, I like to bring color in that so that it opens, so the viewer can enter into the piece. So charcoal is the first thing I usually pick up first before I add acrylic or oil. So hopefully that answered that question.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear about your process too. Helen, someone asked if you work with brands and what that kind of process looks like, and if that's different to your personal process.
Yeah, I do. So I run an independent design studio, solo design studio. And so a lot of my work over the years has been with brands. I think it is a little bit of a different process. I think when I'm working with a client, I'm generally more kind of like problem solving and catering to the client. Whereas it took me many years of working as a freelance designer and illustrator to kind of carve out separate time for my personal practice. And it's something I'm still figuring out, but I'm noticing, especially in the past year or so that those are really distinct processes. And it's almost like the personal practice is a way of, it's a way of kind of recovering from the from the day job, and it is that kind of like sacred space, protected space, altar space. A lot of what I make, I think, comes from this kind of deep necessity, and is not necessarily something that is tied to, you know, being shown or any kind of public expectation.
Well, a question for all of you. How have your creative priorities shifted in the past few months? And has your sense of purpose or where you're finding your weave stay fixed, or is it a moving target?
I could start. Yeah, I think that my creative priorities have shifted in the past few months. You know, I think the revolution happened in the Twin Cities, and you can't be an artist and not feel a shift. I think where the people go, creatives follow, and sometimes I feel like where creatives go, the people follow. So for me, my priorities have you know, my priorities have always been rooted in my Blackness, and making sure that my story is, my own personal story is present in any and all of the work that I do. Hence why even in a presentation like this, I'm always bringing in the faces and the people that have been in my life. They deserve to have this space. I wouldn't be here without them. But I also noticed that after the uprising happened specifically, I started thinking about abolition more intentionally. How do I get free? I'm still not free. My kid's not free. My husband's not free. My sisters, my family, we are not free in this country. And I think that was always ever present. I think that it's gotten more painful. It's more painful, and it keeps me up at night. And so I think that my creative priorities are all about, how do I get free? How do I get us free? How do I make it so that my work is contributing and making an impact, so that my kid is not sitting here 20 years from now having the same conversation, I'm not free.
Do either Helen or Lissa want to say anything about this question? Otherwise, we can move on.
My creative priorities have shifted a lot, especially just in my body of work, because before everything was happening, I had an aha moment. I was like, okay, I have this body of work I'm really interested in. I've put in all my investigating skills into everything. I found out everything I needed to find out. I'm ready to paint.
Oh, there she is. You're back. You cut out a little bit. Could you talk a little bit more about your research process? I think you're in the middle of talking about feeling ready to paint, and you kind of cut out a little bit there.
Oh yeah, my service is bad. But yeah, my creative priorities have changed a lot, because now, like I said before, I think more on a
Oh no. Well, Helen, did you have anything to say about the question? Sorry, Liz, cutting out.
Yeah, I think my creative priorities have shifted, and they continue to shift around. I mean, I think even before the pandemic, I had just shifting ideas about, time and productivity and value, and, really grappling with the extractive nature of capitalism, and the ways that that perpetuates harm that's like disproportionately distributed. And I live in the Bay Area. I'm around a lot of companies that seem to hemorrhage money, but create harm and divide. And so I think my creative process, or my work being tethered to those ecosystems for the beginning of my career, and having to kind of reevaluate that in the recent years, and how it's just I think what I'm trying to say is that there are a lot of ideas of value and productivity or creativity that are imposed, it seems, by organizations and companies that are only interested in profit. And so I've been kind of peeling back those layers and trying to find the places where I can think of other paths, other possibilities, and get free and make all of us free.
Absolutely. There are so many different issues going on right now. Like you said, peeling back those layers is difficult but important. Okay. If you could go back and tell your 18-year-old self something, what would it be? This one's juicy. This one's a tough one, huh?
I would say be patient. I think I would say be patient, but that's more easier said than done at 18, because you want everything fast. And I would say be patient. It'll all come together. It might not look like it, but it will all come together, because there's those moments where I laugh to myself about what I overreacted about. And then, I feel like they're little laughter, little insiders with God, because I'm kind of like, I see what you did there, So I would tell my 18-year-old self to be patient.
I love that. I was going to say that too, like thinking about the question for myself, everything feels so big when you're younger, So like you said, being more patient, something we can still all use, I think.
I think also it's hard to remember what I was like at 18, but I think that it was around the time that maybe I was letting go of being an obsessive person, and that's something that I've recently allowed back into my life. I think that's what I would tell myself.
I think for me, I think I said a lot of it in my presentation, but I think I was just always kind of second guessing myself, because if you were in my head, you would see so much weird shit, and I was just like, this is weird. Who dreams up worlds like this? And I think that's what happens when you maybe don't have when you have all these non-traditional entities around you and storytellers, and the outside world doesn't normalize that. You start to wonder, like, am I the weird one? So I think my advice to you is, you are enough. whatever it is that you're maybe seeking out there. Someone said this in a different writer Zoom I was on, and I've been sort of repeating it over and over and over, and that is, everything you need is at home. And this particular writer was saying that their grandmother would say that to them often. Everything you need is at home. You know, if they wanted to go to the store and get a new toy, or they wanted to go hang out at someone else's house, their grandmother would say, everything you need is at home. And for me, home is spirit. And so everything I need is at home. And I think that if I had known that at 18, I'd have followed my intuition more. I'd have named that spirit the queen that she was back then, and I'd have walked in that confidence and in that power a lot earlier. So you are enough, and everything you need is at home.
That's great. I love that. Here's a fun one. Do you all record your dreams? And if so, how do you help yourself remember them? And do they affect you? Do speculative worlds affect your work? This is a really interesting question. That's from Corinne in the chat too.
Yes.
I don't record my dream. I forget them. They're so, I wake up, I'm like, I can feel the energy of a dream often when I wake up, but I don't remember all of the details. I can't wait to hear what Helen and Lissa have to say.
My dreams lately have been really scary, so I don't like to think of them. I don't know why they're scary, because I watch a lot of like documentaries and things like that, and they have just been really, really, really scary. But then there's moments where my dreams are very beneficial, because I feel like I envision my paintings when I'm sleeping, and then I wake up, or I turn over to the bed, and then it's like I jump out of my sleep to write it down, because I know it's a really good idea and it's not going to stay again. So there's moments where my dreams are good, but lately they've just been really bad because I haven't been getting any sleep. So yeah, I don't have good dreams right now.
Yeah, I have recorded my dreams for a long time, but I also have a similarly fraught relationship with my dreams. Because of PTSD, and so I record them when I'm able to, and then I don't when it's difficult. But I do remember reading that dreams are a way of dealing with PTSD, in that it's a way of processing subconsciously, and it's a way of expressing a lot on the emotional spectrum that maybe is unavailable in waking life. And so I think about my dreams as like this kind of part of me that's working on healing, even if I'm not conscious of it.
Thank you. Okay, someone said, to everyone, in the idea of thinking of art and writing as love letters, were there stories, pieces, or makers that touched you without knowing them personally, and how did they support you on your path?
I think for me, I talked a lot about how writers were my friends, and one writer in particular who really shaped me and supported me without their knowing was Zora Neale Hurston. I remember reading Their Eyes Were Watching God and feeling like someone was speaking wisdom directly into my soul. I felt plugged in, if that makes sense. And I feel like her words helped. I think that's why representation is so important for young folks. I think seeing her face and her picture on the back of her book and reading her words gave me courage to write. And I think Maya Angelou was the same for me, and J. California Cooper was the same for me. Just felt so much like Black women writing were a key.
I would say James Baldwin was that was the one, because he made me critically think of, question everything, you know, like, why must something be this way? Like, he just made me question everything and made me see my value, you know. So I really appreciate his writings. He has this and I love his talks. I can listen to that man talk for hours. And he has this one video on the integrity of the artist. And I listen to that every day. Like, I listen to that every day because he really asks us to kind of explore that as artists, as creatives. So that was someone that really touched me a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, so many. I think of two particular pieces that I reread over and over. One is Audre Lorde's On the Uses of the Erotic, and the other one is Ursula K. Le Guin's A Non-Euclidean View of California as a Cold Place to Be. And I probably reread them several times a year. And recently reading Kathy Park Hong's Minor Feelings, which is about kind of reconciling with Asian American identity. And I'd never read anything like that before. I think, to be honest, I would probably have referenced mostly Black queer women writers before that, to kind of understand that, understand the nuances of identity.
As it pertains to makers, artists that have inspired me would be, I love German expressionist painters. So I love that time period. I love what they were making work on, and how the intimacy they talked about with their work. That was, they're one of the people that I looked at work a lot, because they talked about oppression in such this intimate way, you know, with humor, with anger, with emotion. And I often look at their work and listening to talks on them, because I think there's something that I can get from there in relations to exploring the oppression within being a first generational, and also being Liberian American in my culture. So I really like German expressionist artists. So.
Fantastic. Douglas asked, I think as a creative person, persistence is an essential component. What other qualities are essential in your creative life?
Rest. I think we've deprioritized rest in our society, and I think especially as a freelancer for many years, you kind of connect the idea of time with money, and so I've had to relearn how to find space for recharging and for things that don't necessarily serve a purpose in kind of the capitalist sense.
I think selfishness, and I say that unapologetically because I think I have to look at my upbringing in this. You know, I think that I'm just wired to nurture and to show up for other folks. And you know, someone says, "Can you?" Yes, before they even finish the ask. And I think as a creative, I've had to learn that no one is going to say, "Hey, have you written this week? Gosh, you look like you need to do some writing. Ooh, you know what? I'm gonna watch the kid all weekend so you can write, because you just seem like you have some pent up creativity that needs to manifest in some work. I'm gonna give you." No one is ever going to. and so I think that I've learned that I have to ask for what I need, and I have to, and then I have to grab hold of what I need. And I say selfish because I think that prioritizing myself is what my work demands. I cannot be the writer that I want to be and never write. I cannot be the publisher that I want to be and not have time ideating the things that I want to do. I cannot be, I can't be a writer and not have time to read works that I know will help me be a better writer. So I think selfishness is a must. And I think about Jane Austen and how she never got married. And I'm like, you know what? So many of my favorite writers are single. I love my husband and I love my child. But I oftentimes imagine an alternate universe where I get to just be all day and write, and there is no one asking or needing or demanding anything of me. I just get to be. And so what I try to do is selfishly create that for myself in this life that I have that is a gift, but create that for myself every chance I get.
Yeah, I agree with that. That selfishness is key because, like you said, you know, how can you say you're a writer and never write? I think that's very, I think that just was a mental note for me because there are moments where I dread coming in the studio because I know that I know this, that responsibility, I need to make this work. And then I'm like, all right, I'm going to go home, you know, because it's like, I'm, when I come in the studio, I'm faced with what I said I wanted, what I want. And then it's like, okay, I don't feel ready, you know? So I think for me, it's really just being in a good mental space. I work best when I'm creative. And I think that I'm currently trying to eliminate all the things that I do. And then with work, you know, looking for ways, you know, asking myself, when do I know when it's time to leave work, you know, stop working and focus on my passion, which is painting and making art. So just being aware of where you are in your body and in your mind with what's going on. Be true to yourself. I think that's a good essential to have, that I haven't been good at. I'm saying it, but I haven't been good at it, but it's been on my mind. It's actually something that's eating me up because I want to know, when do I get the red light? I mean, the green light, I should say, the green light to leave and go and be my authentic self in the studio. So yeah, thank you for that selfishness note. So.
Right. Someone asked, is Helen wearing a coyote necklace too? Looks like it.
I am. And does it have the same representation in Taiwanese culture? There are no coyotes in Taiwan, but I think in cultures throughout the world, including Chinese and Taiwanese culture, there's often a divide between like the domesticated dog and wild canines, and that has a lot to do with power and control. And in Chinese culture specifically, it's very gendered. It's aligned with the yin and the feminine, and of course, like the imperial past wanted to suppress that in favor of the masculine and patriarchal. So it does still kind of, it kind of holds a parallel set of concerns that are important to my work.
Fascinating. Thank you all once again for being here. And thank you for everyone who is watching. This is our first program of the year, actually, and our first virtual program too. So we found our groove eventually, we got into it, and I think that we had a really fruitful and rich conversation. I think the takeaways are, to take care of yourself, to be comfortable with making some uncomfortable moves, but eventually, they'll pay off, and you got to take some risks to find your magic. And I think that's a fantastic lesson. So some final things. Thank you for joining us again. Fill out the survey. There's going to be a survey that you get in your email afterwards. And this will, if you do the survey, this will enter you to win a $20 gift certificate to the WAM shop. So make sure to do that, especially since this is our first program and our first virtual program as well. We'd love to hear what you thought worked, what didn't work. It would be really helpful for us. And then finally, if you want to make another visit to WAM, whether virtual or physical, we have some events coming up. We have the Aesthetics of Fascism, Artist Talk by Brooks Turner, and that's on Wednesday, October 28th. Scene at the Cedar at Thursday, October 29th. And Amrika's Election Night Comedy Special, which is Tuesday, November 3rd, so right before the election there. And then if you'd like to visit us in person, we are open Thursday through Sunday now, 12 to 5 p.m. And more information on that can be found at our website. So thank you all once again for joining us. It was a wonderful conversation. Yay, round of applause for you. See you all, thank you.